All right, now we need to add a primary key to each table. As you know, a primary key is a column that uniquely identifies each record in a given table. So what column can we use here to uniquely identify each student? We cannot use the first name because many people can have the same first name. The same is true for the last name. What about the combination of the first and last names? This is what we call a composite primary key. A composite primary key is one that has multiple columns. Again, here we cannot rely on the combination of the first and last names because two people can have the same full name, John Smith and John Smith. What about the email? Well, email certainly uniquely identifies each student, but the problem with the email is that it can be several characters long. So as you will see shortly, when we add a relationship between these two tables, this primary key in this table, in this case, email, is going to be repeated in the enrollments table. So every time a student enrolls in a course, his primary key, in this case, email, is going to get repeated in the enrollments table. And that is not a good idea because we're repeating several characters. Also, ideally, a primary key should not change. So its value should stay the same forever. So this email column is not a good candidate for a primary key because a student can change their email later on. So in situations like this, we introduce a new column, which we call an ID column, and we use that as the primary key. So double-click the table. Here I'm going to add a new column, student underline ID. By default, we use the int or integer type, which allows us up to 2 billion records. And that is pretty sufficient for most scenarios. But don't take this as a hard and fast rule. Always think about the context. All right, now press tab. Let's mark this as a primary key. Now you can see that whenever we check this box, not null gets checked by default because a primary key must have a value to identify each record uniquely. Now, by convention, we should always put the primary key first. This makes it easier for us to understand our design. So here on Mac, unfortunately, we don't have drag and drop, but we can right-click this and click move up. Let's do it again and again and again. All right, now we need to add a primary key to the courses table. So once again, we cannot rely on any of these attributes or columns. So we need to add a new column called course ID. So course ID of type integer, and this is going to be a primary key. And by the way, I forgot to check this primary key as an auto increment column because we want MySQL to automatically generate values for this column. This just makes it easier for us to insert records in this table. We don't have to worry about the uniqueness of values, okay? Now, let's move this up. So back to the students table. Here's our student ID column. Let's also check this as an auto increment column. Beautiful. Now, what about the enrollments table? We're going to look at that next.